Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So today we're going to be looking at the 2019 paper, but first, if we go to QuickTime-Revision.com and we go to past papers, AQA, GCSE, and we go down here to the Combined Chemistry Higher 2019 paper 1. This is the paper that we're going to be going through today. Let's get into this. This question is about metals. Figure 1 shows what happens when calcium, copper, magnesium, and zinc are added to hydrochloric acid. So we have the calcium, the copper, the magnesium, and the zinc, and they are added to the hydrochloric acid. So immediately we're looking at the reaction is between the metal and hydrochloric acid. Now, as we can see in the diagram in figure 1, we have calcium producing a lot of bubbles, copper, no bubbles, magnesium, less bubbles than calcium, and zinc is producing less bubbles than magnesium itself. And those bubbles are made of hydrogen gas, as stated in there, okay? Now, what is the order of decreasing reactivity of the four metals? Now, this is something that very often gets wrong. It's simply because you're not reading the questions properly. They want you to do it in decreasing order. So that will be from the most reactive to the least reactive. Now, we know that the one that is the most reactive is going to be the calcium, okay? So we need to choose something that starts with calcium. So clearly, this is not going to be our answer. Neither is this one here. The only two starting with calcium are options number 2 and option number 3. Now, after calcium, we know that the one that produces the most amount of bubbles is going to be magnesium, not copper. So that immediately tells you that that is not the correct answer, leaving you with the correct answer by default, okay? So this is one of the things that I try to explain very often. If you're not sure about what the answer is in a multiple choice question, go through the process of elimination. You want to cut off whatever you think that is definitely not the answer, okay? But this is what I mean by the process of elimination. So let's move on to the next question, 1.2. A student wants to make a fair comparison of the reactivity of the metals with hydrochloric acid. Name 2 variables that must be kept constant. Things that you want to keep constant is your control variables, okay? And some of the control variables are the mass of the metal, the surface area of the metal, the concentration of the acid, the volume of the acid, the temperature of the acid, okay? You will never ever get marks if you write down amount of metal or amount of acid, okay? You gotta go for volume of metal, or you gotta go for, you gotta go for volume of acid or mass of metal, okay? Now, the mark scheme tells you that you should also allow weight of the metal. That could be a possibility, but in most cases, amount will definitely not give you the answer. Not in most cases, in all cases, amount will not give you the answer, okay? Now, it is important that you familiarize yourself with the mark scheme, because that way you can see what things AQA is looking for in the exams, what things are allowed and what things are not allowed, okay? So let's just write down the answers. So some of the acceptable answers are the following. Okay, now they're only asking you for 2, but I'm giving you more than 2 just so you have your options open, okay? It's better to know more than what you need than not enough of what you need, okay? Just in case you forget one of those. Now, question 1.3. What is the independent variable in this reaction? Now, your independent variable is what you change, okay? So the one thing that you are going to be changing here is the metal itself, because remember, we had 4 different metals. We had calcium, copper, zinc, and magnesium. And those are the things that you're changing, because those are the metals that you are reacting with the acid. Question 1.4. Predict the reactivity of beryllium compared with magnesium. Give a reason for your answer. Use the periodic table. Now, I'm going to say this again. The periodic table is not something that you want to memorize. The periodic table is something that you want to learn how to read. Now, as you can see here in the periodic table, beryllium is higher than magnesium in the periodic table. So what that means is that magnesium is going to be more reactive. Now, the first row, which only has hydrogen and helium, they only have one shell because they're in period number 1. That's in row number 1. Beryllium is in row number 2 or period number 2, which means it has 2 outer shells and 1 outer shell, and you know what I mean. Now, magnesium is in row number 3 or period 3, which means it has 3 shells. That means that the outer shell of magnesium is further away than the outer shell of beryllium to their respective nuclei. What that means is that it would be a lot easier for magnesium to lose its 2 electrons in its outer shell than beryllium, and therefore making it more reactive. So the first thing we're going to do is that we're going to write down that beryllium is less reactive or magnesium is more reactive. And the reason that we could have is, one, there's greater attraction between the nucleus and the outer electrons. Another thing would be there more energy is needed to remove the electrons. Loss of electrons is more difficult. The outer electron closer to the nucleus and less shielding. Okay, any of those would actually give you a mark. You could also say that it's higher in the group. You could also say that the reactivity increases going down the group. So any of those things will give you the mark when talking about beryllium, but you could also write the converse of it, or say that means the opposite, which would be that magnesium has less attraction between the outer shell than and between the electron in the outer shell and the nucleus, and so on. Okay, so let's write down some of those answers. Right, so let's go now to question 1.5. A solution of hydrochloric acid contains 3.2 grams of hydrogen chloride in 50 centimeter cubes. Calculate the concentration of hydrogen chloride in grams per decimeter cube. Right, so in a question like this, there is something that we can use, which is a technique to break down the question section by section in order to get this calculation right. Okay, now this is called ICE. The I stands for information. Okay, so let's see what information we got. It says here that a hydrochloric acid contains 3.2 grams of a hydrogen chloride. That's our first part of information. We know that is 50 centimeter cubes in a solution, because that there is a solution. Okay, there we go. Remember, a solution is anything, any liquid that has a solid dissolved in it makes a solution. And we know that this here is mass and this here is volume. Okay, now they're asking me to calculate the concentration. Okay, I need to calculate the concentration of the hydrogen chloride. Now this is telling me right now that I need to find a way to use the concentration equation to solve this out. Okay, so now that I've highlighted all my or underlined my information, I can take that off. Now, before I go into the equation, the C stands for conversion of units. So at the moment, the only thing that I might need to convert will be this here, because they're asking me to give my answer in grams, and that is already in grams, and they want decimeter cubes. So I need to change that centimeter cubes into decimeter cubes, and that's gonna be my first mark over there. Okay, so let's see. So if I want to convert centimeter cubes into decimeter cubes, I'm gonna have to divide by 1,000. So that right there is going to give me my first mark. Right, so I have done my conversion already. Now it's time for the equation. What is the equations for calculating concentration? So from what I can remember, concentration equals mass of a substance over volume of solution. So let's write that down. Okay, now at this point, I have done my equation. S stands for substitution. Now here I gotta substitute the numbers that are given to me, okay? So let's see, for instance, I've not been given the concentration. I know that the mass is 3.2 grams, and I know that the volume is 50 centimeter cubes, but we are gonna write 0.05 decimeter cubes. And now I can work out my answer. Now, in this specific question, they're not asking me for a specific decimal place or significant figures or specific units, right? Well, the units they're giving me, they're asking me for grams per decimeter cubes, but you got to be very careful because that conversion to decimal places or significant figures might give you the last mark that you need, okay? So that is my substitution done. This is only at 3 marks. So there you have it. That is 3 marks. 1 mark for making your conversion of units, 1 mark for your working out, 1 mark for your actual answer. And if you were being asked to deliver the answer in a specific significant figures, specific decimal places, or even in standard form, that would have been your mark number 4, okay? So that is it, question 1.5. I believe question 1 is done. There's a total of 9 marks, so let's move on to the next question in the next video. Right, so there you have it, quick time revision. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.